Welcome, everyone, and a really special welcome to you, our listener, to a brand new deep dive. We're thrilled to have you joining us today.
Absolutely. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, so we usually spend a significant amount of time on this show exploring external structures,
Yeah.
how society functions, the impact of tech paradigms, shifting geopolitical landscapes.
The world as it turns around us.
Exactly, the world turning. But today, our mission points the compass entirely inward. We are going to explore this profoundly moving, just deeply layered audio session.
It really is.
It's a piece of source material dedicated to unpacking the psychological, the energetic, and the spiritual architecture of the father figure. And right out of the gate, we need to establish that this is absolutely not your conventional biological exploration.
No, not
a standard psychological rundown of family dynamics.
It certainly isn't. And I think that departure from the conventional is really what makes this particular material so compelling.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that the source uses the concept of the father as a gateway. It's like a master key.
A master key, right.
To understanding our foundational relationship with authority, how we conceptualize our future, our inner drive, and ultimately how we orient ourselves within the universe itself.
It's massive.
It is massive. We're looking at a highly unique synthesis today. It merges incisive psychological observation with somatic energy work and this highly structured guided visualization.
Which we will definitely get into later.
Yes, but understanding this masculine principle, which is how the text refers to it, is presented not just as an interesting thought experiment. It's a crucial, non-negotiable step for breaking free from lifelong subconsciously programmed behavioral loops.
Mapping the infrastructure of why we do what we do.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start. Because before we plunge into the depths of these concepts, I want to establish the parameters of our exploration for you, the listener.
Ground rules are important here.
Very. The material we are examining today will be presented to you entirely anonymously. You are not going to hear any names, we won't reference specific academic or spiritual institutions, and you won't be given any identifying markers about the original speaker.
Which I think is a brilliant way to approach this.
We're intentionally stripping all of that external context away. We want to give you just the raw transformative concepts so these ideas can stand entirely on their own merit.
Without the baggage of authority bias.
Right. No preconceived judgments. So, wherever you happen to be right now, whether you're commuting, making dinner, or just sitting quietly in your living room, I invite you to get comfortable. Settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey that fundamentally challenges how we perceive our own histories.
It's a highly necessary approach, taking the anonymous route. By removing specific identities, we automatically remove our own subconscious prejudices.
Exactly.
We are left solely with the raw architecture of the ideas. And I will add a caveat for our listener right now. The concepts presented in this session are incredibly dense.
Very dense.
They're challenging, sometimes provocative, but highly rewarding if you are willing to apply them as a lens to your own lived experience. We're essentially dissecting the archetypal coding of the human psyche today.
That is a perfect framing. Let's get right into the core thesis of the material, which completely redefines what we call father energy. The speaker makes it abundantly clear that this is not tethered to having a male parent.
Right. It goes way beyond biology.
Way beyond. The text symbolizes father energy as the literal manifestation of time, the future, the formulation of plans, the analytical mind, outward momentum, and our capacity to actualize our dreams.
Which, if you're familiar with archetypal psychology or esoteric traditions, the alignment of the masculine principle with structure and forward motion isn't a totally new concept.
No. It's not new, but what struck me was how uncompromisingly the source applies this to our daily practical lives. It completely reframes how we diagnose our own internal roadblocks.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes perfect, cohesive psychological sense. Think about the archetypal roles as they've been historically understood across various traditions.
Okay.
If the feminine principle, which is often, though not always, associated with the mother, represents the earth, the nurturing container, the here and now.
The present moment.
Exactly, the present moment and the internal shifting emotional landscape. Then the masculine principle, the father energy, represents the arrow.
The arrow. I like
It's the boundary line, it's the architectural structure, it's the forward momentum into the unknown wilderness of tomorrow.
And the source material argues a very specific equation here. If you want to understand your exact current relationship with the future, you have only to examine your internal relationship with your primary father figure.
The mirror of the future.
The mirror of the future. That is the exact phrase used, and it is a heavy concept to truly internalize.
It really is.
The text posits that the adjectives you use to describe your father are the exact same adjectives your subconscious uses to describe your own future and your own spiritual potential.
It functions as an incredibly precise diagnostic tool.
Yeah, think about it. If you're sitting there feeling utterly paralyzed in your outward life, if you can't seem to pull the trigger on launching a business, or if the very thought of 5-year planning induces nausea.
Or if your ambitions feel like they're locked behind a glass wall.
Right. The text suggests this paralysis is not a business problem. It's not a motivational problem. It tracks directly back to this foundational energetic relationship.
The father figure is the lens. It's the literal optic nerve through which you perceive your own potential.
So the speaker in the audio suggests a mental exercise. When we ask ourselves the seemingly simple question, what is a father?
The answer we spontaneously generate is simultaneously our definition of what the universe has in store for us.
That's wild. So if your internalized definition of a father is someone who is fundamentally absent or unavailable,
Then your nervous system will subconsciously anticipate a future that is empty, barren, and entirely unsupported.
you'll expect to be alone in your endeavors.
Exactly. And conversely, if your definition is someone who is hypercritical and demanding, you will inherently approach your future plans with a baseline of intense anxiety,
Constantly bracing for judgment.
anticipating failure, viewing the world as a harsh evaluator.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to actively consider right now. What are the immediate adjectives that surface when you connect with that father energy?
And how accurately do those exact adjectives map onto your visceral feelings about the years ahead of you?
That is something that requires real, quiet introspection to answer honestly.
Definitely.
And the source doesn't let us off the hook there. It pushes the philosophical envelope significantly further. It introduces the concept of choosing your father.
Yes, the friction point.
Major friction point. This is where a lot of people naturally throw up their hands. The speaker even acknowledges this immediate, almost violent pushback in the audio.
People say, absolutely not. I was born into this. It was forced upon me.
Right. I didn't choose the dysfunction, the pain, or this specific dynamic. Why would I choose that?
But the text introduces a developmental and spiritual framework asserting that, on some level, we do choose our parents.
Or, if you prefer a less esoteric phrasing, the father you get provides the exact, precise frictional environment required for your specific personal evolution.
We need to tread carefully but firmly here, because this is a profound framework of radical responsibility.
It's not about victim blaming.
Not at all. It is not about dismissing real trauma. What it does is systematically remove the individual from the disempowering role of the perpetual victim.
Placing them back into the active center of their own developmental journey.
Exactly. The source material argues that even if the father figure was deeply flawed, absentee, or outright destructive, that specific, unique cocktail of flaws created the exact gravitational resistance required for you to develop certain necessary psychological muscles.
Give me an example of that.
Sure, so if you had a completely passive, unreliable father, perhaps the ensuing vacuum forced you to develop an ironclad sense of self-reliance and hypercompetence that now serves as the foundation of your adult survival.
Okay, I see.
Recognizing this doesn't excuse or validate negative behavior,
Of course not.
but it shifts the psychological focus from, look at what was unjustly done to me, to look at the complex, resilient machinery that was built within me as a direct result.
Which brings us to a crucial distinction the text makes, one that completely upends modern pop psychology. It discusses the difference between reconciling and forgiving.
This is a vital paradigm shift.
Because we're constantly fed this narrative that forgiveness is the ultimate moral high ground. It's the final destination of healing.
But the speaker argues quite forcefully against the entire concept of forgiving a parent.
Yeah, the explanation is that forgiving someone, especially a foundational authority figure from a place of perceived superiority, is actually an act of deep arrogance.
It implies a hierarchical dynamic where you are sitting on a moral throne, dispensing pardons to a lesser failing being.
Instead, the material advocates for radical acceptance and reconciliation, stripping away the ego's need to be the bigger person.
It's about understanding the objective, ultimate utility that this deeply flawed authority figure served in your overall psychological architecture.
What's fascinating here is the nuanced distinction the speaker draws between the ego's desires and the spirit's necessity.
Yes. Forgiveness, in the way it is commonly practiced and celebrated in our culture, frequently serves to stroke the ego.
It sounds like I am evolved and big enough to forgive you for how small and broken you were.
Exactly. It maintains a separation. Reconciliation within the specific context of this audio session is positioned as a form of ego death.
Ego death.
It's the sobering recognition that this individual, burdened with all their inherent limitations, their own unhealed generational trauma, and their neuroses, inadvertently provided the exact necessary curriculum for your life's masterclass.
You aren't pardoning them. You are acknowledging the stark reality of the energetic dynamic.
You're accepting that the friction had a functional, albeit painful, purpose in forging who you are today. It is a profound paradigm shift from a vertical, hierarchical relationship of judge and judged to a horizontal recognition of interconnected growth and necessary resistance.
That reframing of forgiveness versus reconciliation feels like a massive weight being lifted. It means you don't have to force yourself to feel warm and fuzzy about someone who caused you pain.
No, you just have to acknowledge the math of the situation.
Math of the situation. I love that. You acknowledge the cause and the effect without the moralizing judgment.
Precisely.
And this naturally bleeds into how we understand the actual structure of the household we grew up in. The text introduces a point that completely shatters the rigid biological gender assumptions we often carry into these conversations.
The question of who actually holds the energy.
Yes. It states that father energy is absolutely not strictly tied to male biology.
Not at all.
If the mother is the primary authority in the home, if she's the one setting the rules, establishing the boundaries, handing down the discipline, and dictating the outward momentum of the family, then, energetically speaking, she is the one holding the masculine principle in that environment.
This is a brilliant and necessary clarification by the speaker, because it rescues the entire conversation from the limitations of biological determinism and moves it squarely into the realm of energetic physics and psychological function.
Right.
A functional household, like any functional system, requires a balance of forces. It requires both the nurturing, expansive, unifying energy and the structuring, boundary-setting, differentiating energy.
So if the biological father is passive or physically absent,
Or emotionally vacant, or simply assumes this softer, nurturing role, the system will not just collapse immediately. The biological mother will instinctively step into the resulting vacuum to provide the necessary structure to keep the family unit surviving.
the child therefore maps their fundamental relationship to authority, discipline, and the masculine principle primarily through the mother.
Exactly. So when we talk throughout this deep dive about healing the father energy or reconciling with the architect of your future, for a significant portion of our listeners, they may actually need to be visualizing and analyzing their relationship with their mother.
Because she was the one who wore the crown of authority.
She wore the crown. That's the analytical question you have to apply to your childhood environment. Who wore the crown?
It isn't about who was legally the father. It's about who was energetically the wall you bounced against.
Yes.
Now, the text doesn't just leave this dynamic in the living room. It scales it up to society at large. The speaker notes that due to immense cultural engineering, the devastating generational impacts of global wars, and rapidly accelerating social shifts, traditional authority roles have frequently faded.
Faded, swapped, or been entirely dismantled.
And the material observes this impartially, almost like an engineer looking at a bridge's structural integrity. It argues that a vacuum of authority, a lack of that stabilizing, predictable masculine principle, inevitably leads to chaos.
It scales perfectly from a single dysfunctional household up to a fractured global society.
If we pull back and view this through a sociological lens, it fundamentally comes down to the necessity of parameters.
The source material is very careful not to advocate for tyranny or oppressive patriarchy, which is an important distinction.
Right, it's not saying we need strict rulers.
No. Rather, it is discussing the natural, inescapable law of structure. Without a container, water simply disperses, spreads thin, and evaporates. The authority figure, energetically speaking, provides the container for a developing child's psyche.
So when that container is compromised or entirely missing,
When there is a profound vacuum of authority, the environment becomes inherently unpredictable. And if there's one thing we know from developmental psychology and neuroscience, it's that the human nervous system cannot tolerate chronic unpredictability.
it interprets a lack of structure as an immediate threat to survival.
Exactly. This external lack of boundaries creates an internal environment of profound chaos that exactly mirrors the physical environment.
Which brings us to a fascinating yet deeply unsettling connection the source makes. We just looked at the chaos created by a lack of authority. But what happens when the pendulum swings violently in the other direction?
Ah, the overcorrection.
The text draws a direct causal line between an environment of excessive rigid control and the birth of chronic anxiety. Can we unpack this? How does the speaker link a hyper-authoritarian presence to the manifestation of this specific kind of internal panic?
Certainly. The source outlines a very specific theory of energetic homeostasis. It suggests that when an environment is fundamentally perceived as unsafe, chaotic, or unpredictable, a parent, very often acting out of their own unhealed terror, might attempt to exert excessive suffocating control.
Trying to fix the chaos by locking everything down.
They become hyper-authoritarian, attempting to micromanage every variable to prevent disaster. In the framework we are discussing, this is a severely overactive, distorted manifestation of masculine energy.
It's structure weaponized.
Structure weaponized. Now, the text operates on the principle that energy within a closed system must always seek equilibrium. If a childhood environment is completely saturated with this heavy, rigid, overbearing masculine control, it naturally and inevitably breeds a compensatory energy to balance the scales.
And in this esoteric framework, the text refers to this compensatory force as negative feminine energy.
Yes. Internally, for the child, this manifests as deep-seated, vibrating anxiety, a chronic state of worry.
A fundamental, paralyzing lack of trust in the natural flow of time and the future.
Because the child's nervous system learns a devastating lesson. The world is inherently dangerous, and safety can only be achieved through tight, exhausting management and hypervigilance.
The resulting systemic exhaustion from that constant low-level state of panic is what we clinically label as anxiety. So, what does this all mean for you, the listener, in your day-to-day life? It means if you are someone who battles a pervasive, free-floating sense of anxiety, that feeling that the other shoe is always just about to drop, you might want to conduct an audit of the authority dynamic in your formative years.
Was there an overbearing, desperate need for control by your caregivers that you subconsciously internalized as a constant state of threat?
You aren't broken. Your nervous system is simply running a highly efficient software program designed for an environment of excessive control.
And recognizing that is the first step to uninstalling the program.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we're about to take everything we just dissected about living room dynamics and project it onto the cosmos.
The macro level.
The macro level. The text moves into a concept it calls the mirror effect, the Father and the Divine. The speaker draws a direct, uncompromising one-to-one parallel between your primary authority figure and your conceptualization of the Creator.
The universe, source energy, whatever you consider to be the ultimate overarching authority of existence.
This is undoubtedly one of the most provocative and potentially paradigm-shifting points in the entire audio session.
It really challenges how we view our spiritual beliefs.
The foundational psychological premise here is that to an infant or young child, parents are not just caretakers, they are gods.
They are literally omnipotent, omniscient beings who completely control the child's survival, their environment, their access to resources, and their perceived reality.
Therefore, when the developing mind begins to construct a template for God or the universe of the divine, it doesn't pull from a vacuum.
No, it tasks this cosmic concept entirely in the physical and emotional mold of those early authority figures.
Because it's the only reference point, the only data set the psyche has available for what ultimate power looks and feels like.
Precisely. The text describes a phenomenon it calls projecting the punisher.
Okay, let's say you grew up with a harsh, punishing, conditionally loving, or incredibly strict father figure. The source argues that, regardless of what religious or spiritual texts you read later in life, your nervous system subconsciously constructs a universe that is equally harsh, rigid, and just waiting in the wings to penalize you for the slightest misstep.
You view the universe not as a supportive, abundant web of interconnected opportunities,
but as a dangerous minefield governed by a deeply punitive force.
And the danger here is that this operation occurs almost entirely below the threshold of conscious awareness. This is where we see a massive disconnect in many people's spiritual or personal development journeys.
How so?
Well, an individual might intellectually adopt a beautiful, expansive philosophy. They might read all the right books, recite affirmations that the universe is loving, abundant, and supportive.
Right, doing all the conscious work.
But if their foundational nervous system level blueprint of authority is based on a punishing, volatile father figure, their actual, visceral lived experience will remain one of fear and expectation of punishment.
They will constantly be looking over their shoulder.
Exactly. When something good happens, they will immediately experience a spike in anxiety, anticipating that a toll must be paid.
Because in their internal archetypal model, authority does not give freely. It extracts, it demands, and it punishes.
It's a terrifyingly common way to live.
And the text points out a fascinating behavioral symptom of this dynamic: hidden rebellion.
Yes, the rebellion.
The speaker notes that individuals who harbor unresolved anger, resentment, or a suppressed desire to rebel against their father are very often engaged in a massive, hidden rebellion against existence itself.
Because they've conflated their father with the ultimate structure of reality.
They spend their lives fighting the very concept of structure. They might chronically sabotage their own success right before crossing the finish line,
Or aggressively resist basic societal rules.
or find themselves locked in constant, draining conflicts with any figures of authority: bosses, mentors, the legal system, because they are essentially shadowboxing.
That's a great way to put it. Shadowboxing.
They are still fighting that original, unresolved battle from their childhood, just projecting it onto new targets.
What's truly poignant about this observation is the text's assertion that this hidden rebellion is ultimately a tragic rebellion against one's own peace and potential.
The source keenly points out that living in a state of constant low-grade friction is metabolically and psychologically exhausting.
When you are fundamentally fighting the foundational rules of the game of life, because you erroneously conflate the neutral rules of the game with a flawed, specific rule maker from your past, you cannot possibly thrive within it.
You spend all your creative life force pushing back against the walls, rather than using the structure of those walls to build a roof over your head.
It is a profound misallocation of energy.
But the text also provides an incredible, almost counterintuitive observation about the exact opposite scenario. It discusses the absent father and the seeker.
This is a fascinating historical pattern.
The speaker takes a historical and archetypal view, noting that if you analyze the lives of major historical spiritual leaders, prophets, visionaries, and philosophers, an unusually high percentage of them share a specific demographic detail.
They grew up entirely without fathers.
Entirely. The father was either deceased, deeply estranged, or physically absent from a very young formative age. The text suggests this is absolutely not a statistical anomaly. It's a mechanism of cause and effect.
It is a remarkable, deeply patterned phenomenon to observe across history. The analytical reasoning provided by the source is rooted in the idea of energetic voids.
Right.
The absence of a physical anchoring father figure leaves a massive gaping void in the developing psyche regarding the masculine principle, structure, and authority.
And as the old adage goes, nature completely abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. Therefore, the individual is psychologically compelled to seek out a father figure, but because the physical realm failed them so completely, they must seek it on a much grander, abstract scale.
They're forced to seek a spiritual father.
The profound, aching loss in the physical material world becomes the exact, necessary catalyst for an ultimate spiritual or philosophical connection.
The child, unanchored by the gravity of a physical authority, essentially anchors themselves directly to the cosmic authority.
It is a breathtaking example of how what is traditionally viewed as a devastating deficit in the material world is repurposed by the human spirit as a massive, unmatched advantage in the psychological and spiritual realm.
It totally reframes the narrative of loss, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It turns an open wound into a telescope.
beautifully said.
This naturally leads us into a highly practical part of the source material, where the text breaks down a spectrum of different father figures and, crucially, identifies the hidden gifts or specific psychological adaptations they force upon the child.
This is where the theory hits the pavement.
Let's start with the dynamic of the weak or passive father. The source deeply explores the impact of a passive, emotionally absent, or disengaged father, specifically when paired with a highly dominant, controlling mother.
The precise energetic recipe.
Yes. The text suggests this recipe often creates children, and it notes this is particularly prevalent in boys, who become intensely, almost obsessively materialistic in their adult lives. Why does a lack of presence lead to a surplus of stuff?
The mechanism described here is a classic, complex form of psychological overcompensation. We've established that the father, in this framework, represents the spiritual, outward, forward-moving structural energy.
So if that specific energy is weak,
If it's weak, porous, or entirely subdued by the mother's dominant control, the child experiences a terrifying lack of an internal anchor. They feel untethered from the masculine principle of strength and structure.
untethered, so what do?
To survive this feeling of internal weightlessness, to compensate for this perceived weakness and profound lack of internal spiritual architecture, the child anchors themselves as heavily as possible in the dense physical, material world.
They seek power, they seek control, and they seek validation through the relentless accumulation of wealth, status symbols, and physical assets.
They do this because their internal blueprint for strength was blank. They're desperately trying to build the indestructible structure on the outside that they were missing on the inside.
The materialism is not greed. It is a search for an anchor.
Exactly, building the structure on the outside.
Building a structure on the outside.
Yeah.
That perfectly encapsulates the drive. Now, let's look at the flip side. What about the fiercely strict, authoritarian, or even cruel father?
This is a challenging one.
The source suggests that even this incredibly difficult, painful dynamic has a specific, functional hidden gift, according to the cosmic curriculum we discussed earlier.
Yes.
The text argues that these highly oppressive, heavy-handed figures forcefully ground children who might otherwise be completely disconnected from the physical world. I want to unpack this carefully because it's a sensitive point.
It is a highly challenging concept to digest because it requires us to completely separate objective psychological function from subjective moral judgment.
Right, the source material is absolutely not endorsing cruelty, nor is it apologizing for abuse.
Rather, it is observing human dynamics through an almost clinical energetic lens. It posits that certain individuals incarnate or are born with a profound predisposition to be ungrounded.
They are overly ethereal, deeply sensitive dreamers who are fundamentally disconnected from the harsh, dense realities of physical existence.
And the theory suggests that a brutally strict, rigid authority figure forces that specific type of child to become intensely hypervigilant and deeply, inescapably embedded in the physical reality of their immediate environment.
The strict punishing rules create a massive, heavy gravitational pull,
Forcing the ethereal child to exist solidly in the material world simply to survive the household. The gift, if one can use that term in this context, is the grounding. It forces the spirit into the body.
The monumental challenge for the individual as they enter adulthood is to maintain that hard-won physical grounding while systematically releasing the deep trauma and terror of how it was originally achieved.
Which is the work of a lifetime, really.
It is. And then the text throws a massive curveball. It addresses what most people would consider the absolute luckiest, most ideal scenario, and it attaches a giant warning label to it.
The perfect dad.
The over-attached child, or the insidious danger of the perfect dad. If a listener's sitting there thinking, well, I'm clear. My dad was my absolute best friend. He was flawless. He was so supportive. We had zero issues.
The text actually shines a very bright warning light on that specific dynamic.
It states that if a child becomes entirely symbiotically dependent on a deeply loving, perfect father for their validation, they are at risk of spending their entire adult life trying to prove themselves to surrogate authority figures.
They map their entire adult operating system around seeking that same intoxicating approval.
This point raises an incredibly important question about the psychological necessity of individuation.
Because the process of becoming an adult requires friction. It requires a breaking away.
If the father is so universally wonderful, so endlessly providing, and so deeply approving, the child may never experience the necessary developmental friction required to separate and establish their own sovereign authority.
They become quite literally addicted to the warm, safe glow of the father's constant approval. As they physically mature and enter adulthood, their psyche remains in a juvenile state, subconsciously seeking to recreate that original, blissful dynamic of approval.
They scour the world looking for bosses to please, mentors to impress, or complex societal structures to conform to.
All in a relentless, endless pursuit of recreating that original validating feeling. Their entire life becomes a meticulously crafted performance designed for an external audience, rather than an authentic expression of their own internal will.
Ironically, they're trapped by the sheer goodness of the relationship because its perfection prevented them from ever needing to claim their own power.
It's like they're forever trying to get a gold star on their homework, even when they're running a company in their 50s.
That's such a great visual. Now, the final point in this section regarding family dynamics is perhaps the most provocative, confrontational, psychological concept in the entire text. It discusses the separation contract.
Ah, yes, the contract.
The speaker suggests that in cases where parents separate or divorce, the child may have unconsciously, energetically signed the contract to make it happen.
This is a hard one for people to hear.
The text argues that in some dynamics, a child actively, though subconsciously, pushes the father away in order to become the mother's primary companion and confidant, fundamentally altering the entire family ecosystem to serve their own hidden emotional needs.
When I read this, I immediately thought listeners are going to reject this.
Oh, absolutely. To tell someone who genuinely suffered through a painful parental divorce that they subconsciously engineered it, that is going to cause immense friction.
And they very frequently do reject it. The speaker in the audio actually anticipates and addresses that exact resistance.
It's crucial to understand that this is not an exercise in victim blaming a child for adult actions.
Rather, it touches on some deeply rooted, almost classical Oedipal dynamics, but the source frames it entirely through the lens of energetic physics.
The idea is that the child, possessing an intense, primal desire for total emotional monopoly over the nurturing source, the mother energetically wedges themselves between the parents.
They sense the cracks in the marriage and they subconsciously widen them.
From the purely external, observable viewpoint, the child appears to be the tragic, helpless victim of a broken home.
But from an energetic, deeply subconscious, psychological viewpoint, the source argues the child was an active, powerful participant. They pushed the masculine authority, the rival for the mother's affection, out of the system so they could elevate their own status.
And become the primary partner within the family hierarchy. It is a radically empowering, albeit uncomfortable perspective.
Because if you can accept the premise that your childhood psyche was actually powerful enough to influence the massive tectonic plates of your family dynamics,
You are forced to realize how much immense untapped power you still possess as an adult to shape your current reality. You shift from a passive passenger to an active architect.
exactly. It forces you to drop the narrative of powerlessness.
When we talk about the weight of these dynamics, it's one thing to discuss the theory in the abstract, but seeing it play out over decades in a single human life is entirely different.
And the material anchors these massive theories with a highly specific, deeply emotional case study.
Shared by the speaker. The speaker details a story about his own family, specifically his father's life. The speaker's father suffered a catastrophic loss. He lost his own dad to an accident when he was only 2 years old.
Consequently, because of the era and the circumstances, he was raised entirely by a village of women, his mother, his aunts, his grandmothers.
He had zero foundational male presence. And as a direct result, because he so profoundly lacked that masculine anchor, he grew up with a pathological drive to be a father to absolutely everyone he encountered.
He fathered his friends, he fathered older relatives, he acted as the patriarch of the entire village.
He was constantly, obsessively trying to prove to the universe that he wouldn't abandon anyone the way he felt he had been abandoned.
It's a textbook, heart-wrenching example of extreme overcompensation, driven by an unhealed core wound.
The father in this narrative experienced a profound traumatic deficit of masculine protective energy at a critical developmental stage.
His psychological response to this deficit was not to retreat into himself, but to project that missing energy outward indiscriminately.
He became an emotional, financial, and practical provider for a seemingly endless circle of people.
Completely exhausting his own internal resources in a desperate subconscious attempt to fill the gaping void left by his own father's death. He was trying to heal his own internal bleeding by becoming the bandage for everyone else's wounds.
It's a noble impulse born of profound tragedy, but it's ultimately unsustainable.
And the unsustainability of it reaches this incredibly poignant, tragic turning point in the narrative.
The speaker details a specific memory from his 7th birthday, which happened to coincide with Father's Day that year.
The speaker's father bought him this amazing, elaborate gift, a full professional-grade football kit.
Cleats, the uniform, the ball, everything. It's the ultimate dream gift for a young boy. But as the father knelt down and handed over this beautiful gift, he looked at his 7-year-old son with tears in his eyes and said, "I never had a father. Will you be my father?"
That moment, it is a staggering, devastating moment of psychological role reversal.
In a single, emotionally overwhelmed sentence, the father completely bypassed the natural order of generations.
He inadvertently took the massive, unresolved, crushing burden of his own childhood grief and placed it squarely on the fragile shoulders of his 7-year-old son.
He abdicated the necessary position of authority, boundary setter, and protector.
And instead, out of his own deep, unhealed sorrow, he placed the child in the role of his psychological anchor. It is a profound boundary violation.
It wasn't done out of malice or cruelty.
No, it was done out of an agonizing, desperate need for the very thing he was denied. But the intent doesn't negate the impact.
The tragic consequences of that single impossible request echoed for decades. The text explains that this massive role reversal meant the speaker spent the next 30 years essentially acting as a parent to his own dad.
He took on his father's immense societal burdens. He stepped in to lead the charities his father had started.
He was constantly managing the family's emotional state, completely ignoring his own needs, his own youth, his own individuation.
He became the structure for the man who was supposed to be his structure.
And the most heartbreaking realization in the entire audio session came when the father eventually passed away. The speaker realized, in the depths of his grief, that he hadn't lost a father. He felt, quite literally, like he had lost his son.
Because that was the functional, day-to-day reality of their relationship. He had been parenting his parent for his entire conscious life.
And we have to understand the cost of this.
When you are forced to assume that role, you forfeit your own childhood. You forfeit your own natural phase development. You are carrying a heavy, dense weight that belongs to a previous generation.
The text uses this specific emotional anecdote to powerfully illustrate a core principle. Unresolved trauma regarding the father energy doesn't just evaporate with time.
It cascades down the generational line, compounding in weight, until someone in the lineage develops the profound awareness and the immense courage required to finally break the cycle and put the energetic roles back in their proper natural order.
And what makes this case study even more compelling is how the text links this invisible emotional dynamic to highly visible, concrete, physical manifestations.
The physical toll.
The speaker notes how his father's inner, unexpressed lifetime of anger at authority, specifically his rage at the universe for leaving him fatherless, ultimately manifested physically in his body.
It started with chronic stomach issues, which the text correlates to how one digests the material world and its harsh, unfair realities.
And tragically, it eventually progressed to fatal colon issues, which the source explicitly links to the body's ultimate inability to let go of the past. The physical manifestation of the inability to release deep-seated toxic anger.
This specific observation aligns perfectly with numerous holistic, psychosomatic, and ancient medical theories.
All of which suggests that chronic, intense, unexpressed emotional states will eventually be forced to find a physical voice.
The body keeps the score. The digestive tract in these frameworks is intrinsically associated with the concept of processing. Processing physical food, certainly, but also processing complex emotional experiences.
So if an individual fundamentally cannot stomach the stark, painful reality of their life,
Or if they're holding on to decades of toxic resentment and absolutely cannot let it go, the text suggests the physical organs bearing those metaphorical and physiological functions will ultimately break down under the relentless energetic strain.
it highlights the absolute life-or-death necessity of doing this inner reconciliation work. It is not just about achieving mental peace or having better relationships.
It is fundamentally about preserving your physical vitality and preventing your body from becoming the storage unit for your unresolved grief.
That is a heavy, sobering realization. But thankfully, the source material doesn't just leave us drowning in these heavy psychological diagnoses.
No, it provides a way out.
It transitions into highly specific, actionable mechanics. This brings us to the methodology of the text, the mechanics of energy, masculine centers, and breath.
Because identifying the problem is only half the battle. You need a tool to move the stagnant energy out of the physical body.
The source outlines a very specific energetic map based on 4 key masculine energy centers, or chakras to use the traditional terminology. Let's walk through them.
First, you have the root center, located at the base of the spine, which represents your fundamental connection to the earth, your survival instincts, and your physical grounding.
Second, moving up, you have the solar plexus, located in the gut, which is the absolute center of willpower, control, ambition, and your individual egoic identity.
Third, you have the throat center, which governs expression, truth, and the ability to say, let there be, the capacity to create reality through your spoken word.
And finally, the crown center at the top of the head, representing your spiritual connection to the cosmos, the ultimate authority, and higher consciousness.
What's deeply fascinating here from a structural standpoint is how seamlessly these 4 specific centers map onto the exact father energy concepts we've been unpacking for the last 40 minutes.
The root is the physical foundation, the inescapable structure of reality.
The solar plexus is the outward drive, the engine of future planning, the ambition to conquer the world.
The throat is the outward, commanding expression of the internal will.
And the crown is the direct connection to the cosmic father, or the divine archetype.
The source material suggests a direct correlation. When our foundational relationship with authority or the masculine principle is distorted by trauma or misunderstanding, these specific energetic channels become either severely blocked or destructively overactive.
The practical energy work we're about to discuss is a targeted technology designed to clear the accumulated static from these specific frequencies.
And the primary foundational tool the source provides for clearing that static before engaging in deep psychological work is the profound power of intentional breath.
The breath is everything here.
The text details a highly specific, sequenced breathing technique to prepare the listener's physical body for the intense mental work of the upcoming visualization. The instruction is precise. You inhale deeply through the nose, visualizing drawing in pure light or life force.
Then, crucially, you hold that breath gently at the very back of the throat.
The text specifically, deliberately states that this holding action filters out ancestral baggage.
And finally, you push that breath deep, deep down into the diaphragm, into the belly.
I want to spend some time on this because why does the breath matter so much? Why is this specific sequence mandated before we even begin to think about our parents?
If we examine the hard physiology behind this specific pattern, it is quite profound. By breathing deeply through the nose and forcefully driving the breath past the chest and down into the diaphragm, the belly, you immediately and mechanically stimulate the vagus nerve.
And what does that do?
This action is like pulling a lever in your biology. It forcibly shifts the body out of the sympathetic nervous system's fight or flight mode.
That sympathetic state is precisely where anxiety, trauma memories, and defensive rigidity reside.
Exactly. By stimulating the vagus nerve, you force the body into the parasympathetic rest and digest mode. But the text doesn't stop at mere physiology. It adds an intentional, highly symbolic layer.
The instruction to hold the breath at the back of the throat to filter out ancestral baggage is brilliant.
It assigns a conscious, psychological intention to an autonomic physiological act. You are using the physical mechanism of the breath to consciously declare to your nervous system that you are no longer passively inhaling the toxic inherited behavioral patterns of the past.
Why is shifting that physiological state an absolute prerequisite for the psychological work?
Yeah.
The text treats it as a non-negotiable step.
Because the human brain, by its very evolutionary design, cannot and will not easily let go of old, rigid thought patterns if the physical body perceives it is currently under threat.
If you are breathing shallowly into your chest, your body is actively signaling your brain that there is a predator nearby.
In a state of perceived danger, the mind grips tenaciously to its established, tested defenses, even if those defenses are maladaptive.
By radically changing the physiological state through deep, intentional diaphragmatic breathing, you are essentially hacking the system.
You're sending a massive all-clear signal to your nervous system saying, we are safe now.
Only in that specific, biologically verified state of perceived safety can the rigid, calcified mental frameworks soften enough to be rewritten, updated, or released entirely.
The breath is the necessary bridge. It transports you from the physical state of chronic tension into the mental state of absolute release.
Okay, that foundational work prepares us for the climax of the source material. We are entering the journey of reconciliation.
The visualization.
This is the absolute core of the session, a highly detailed, profoundly deep guided visualization. It is essentially an induced trance state.
It is.
And I want to walk you, the listener, through the specific imagery the speaker uses, because every single detail is loaded with psychological intent. It is incredibly vivid.
Where does it start?
It starts with the instruction, once the breathing has anchored you, to visualize dropping a thick, vibrant, red, energetic root or cord from the very base of your spine.
You visualize pushing this red root down through the floor beneath you.
Pushing it deep through the rocky crust of the earth, descending miles down until it plugs directly into the spinning, molten, glowing red core of the earth itself.
This is a classic foundational grounding technique found in many somatic practices, but it's amplified here for a specific reason.
By establishing a direct, visualized connection to the earth's core, the individual is establishing an unbreakable, massive anchor in the dense physical realm before they attempt to do deep, ethereal, potentially destabilizing psychological work.
You cannot safely ascend into the dizzying heights of the higher mind or navigate the depths of repressed trauma without first being immutably tethered to the ground.
It's a safety protocol.
It ensures the individual doesn't become dissociated, panicked, or lost in the intense emotional turbulence that the visualization is designed to evoke.
Once that immovable grounding is established, the visualization takes a sharp downward turn. The speaker's voice guides you to visualize a descent into a dark, ancient, enclosing cave.
As you walk deeper and deeper into the suffocating darkness of this cave, you are guided by the rhythmic, steady sound of a drum beating in the distance.
And as you walk, that drum beat slowly morphs, softens, and changes tempo until you realize you're no longer listening to a drum.
You're listening to the sound of a mother's heartbeat from the inside.
You're surrounded by this warm, rhythmic pulsing in the absolute dark. Let's pause on that transformation, the drum to the heartbeat. By doing this, the meditation is actively bypassing the brain's logical defenses, isn't it?
Absolutely. From a clinical psychological standpoint, this is a clear, guided regression to the womb environment.
The cave is universally recognized as the ultimate archetype of the feminine, enclosing completely protective space.
The subtle auditory shift from the external drum to the internal heartbeat solidifies this regression on a sensory level. The explicit goal here is to mentally travel backward along your own timeline, bypassing all intellectual defenses to return to a state of absolute unconditional safety and total preconditioning.
It takes the listener back to a conceptual time before any trauma occurred, before they encountered any flawed authority figures, and before any rigid, limiting beliefs were formed about themselves or the world.
It's a profound psychological resetting of the board back to a state of pure, unblemished potential.
And it is only from that place of pure potential, that absolute safety, that the ascent begins. The voice guiding the visualization paints an epic, almost cinematic sequence.
You emerge from the dark safety of the cave and suddenly find yourself standing on the shore of a massive, vibrant, wildly tossing green ocean.
You dive in and swim across it. Upon reaching the other side, you begin climbing a giant, seemingly endless staircase built into a cliff face.
At the top of the stairs, you step into a modern elevator that shoots you straight up through the clouds.
Finally, the doors slide open, and you step out onto a blindingly bright, pristine, snowy mountain peak where you are immediately met by a giant white eagle.
This sequence is a wild ride of imagery. What's the psychological function of stacking all these symbols?
The symbolism here is incredibly rich, densely packed, and universally understood across the collective unconscious of many cultures. Let's break it down sequentially. First, the green ocean.
Water always represents the emotional realm, the subconscious. Swimming across it signifies actively moving through and surviving the turbulent emotional landscape of your past.
The staircase and the subsequent elevator signify a rapid, intentional, almost forceful elevation of your consciousness.
You are leaving the dense, heavy depths of the subconscious mind and ascending rapidly into the higher, objective, analytical mind.
Then you reach the snowy peak. The snow represents absolute clarity, cold, hard truth, a sterile environment free from emotional contagion, and a pristine state of awareness.
And finally, the giant white eagle. The eagle is the quintessential cross-cultural symbol of soaring above earthly, petty attachments.
The eagle possesses a bird's-eye view. It sees the whole majestic landscape, the entire sweeping tapestry of your life and your lineage, rather than just the individual tangled threads you normally get caught up in down on the ground.
Interacting with the eagle represents successfully reaching a higher state of consciousness where true objectivity, deep understanding, and therefore true healing can finally occur.
The eagle then guides you to the climax of the journey. On this pristine peak, you arrive at a tiny, ancient stone door set directly into the side of the mountain. You pass through this narrow threshold, and inside, you find a single stone table.
The text specifically notes that this represents a traditional washing stone.
The kind of stone table historically used to prepare the departed for their final rest. The explicit, unavoidable instruction in the visualization is that you must lie down on this stone funerary table.
This is a powerful, highly intentional, and quite confronting invocation of ego death.
Lying willingly on a table designed for the departed signifies that the old version of you, the specific version built on years of resentment, childhood fear, and a fundamentally distorted relationship with authority, must metaphorically cleanly die.
You absolutely cannot carry that old, rotting architectural framework into the new, liberated phase of your life. Lying on the stone is the ultimate place of surrender. You are giving up the fight to maintain your old identity.
While you are lying perfectly still on this stone table, the visualization guides you to experience a brilliant, blinding light washing through your physical body. But it's not a general light.
The instruction is to feel it wash through you, organ by organ.
It clears out outdated mental frameworks and useless emotional residue from your tissues. It's described almost like a deep internal pressure washing of the soul.
And this ties directly back to our earlier extensive discussion about the physical, somatic manifestation of emotional blockages, the stomach and colon issues we discussed.
The visualization is actively, specifically instructing the subconscious mind to locate exactly where the ancient anger, the paralyzing fear, and the unwept grief are physically stored in the body's organs.
By using the intense visualization of light as a solvent, it attempts to dissolve those physical knots.
It's literally clearing the biological hardware, so a brand new, updated psychological operating system can be safely installed.
Which brings us to the final sequence.
You rise off the stone table, renewed, washed clean, and now you are finally ready for the ultimate confrontation and integration. In your mind's eye, standing on that mountain peak, you must summon and meet your parents.
First, you meet the mother to express deep gratitude and gather nurturing strength from the feminine principle.
But then, the main event, you face the father.
This is the absolute crescendo of the entire audio session. Think about the preparation required to get here.
After grounding to the Earth's core, regressing to the safety of the womb, swimming the emotional ocean, ascending to the objective peak, and experiencing the surrender of ego death.
The individual is finally in a state of consciousness pure enough and resilient enough to interact with the raw imprint of the father figure without triggering the usual deeply grooved defensive responses or angry flashbacks.
The text gives a very specific, incredibly physical instruction for this mental confrontation. You don't just stand there and look at him. You must bow to the father.
But the instruction is not for a polite nod.
You are instructed to bow so deeply, bending entirely forward from the waist, that you can no longer even see his face or his shoes. You must bow until he is completely out of your vision.
This is a profound, masterful act of extreme humility, and it is absolutely crucial for the listener to understand that this is not about submission or subservience,
It's not about waving a white flag and saying, you were right and I was wrong.
or in any way validating abusive, neglectful, or cruel behavior. That is a common misinterpretation. What this deep bow truly represents is the complete neutralization of your own ego.
By bowing so deeply that the father figures entirely out of your line of sight, you are forcibly removing your ego's desperate, lifelong need to stare him down.
To judge his flaws, to argue your case, or to demand an apology that may never come.
You're removing yourself from the fight. You're simply physically acknowledging the immense, profound, unavoidable role this person played in the foundational architecture of your very existence, regardless of how terribly flawed or painful their execution of that role was.
It is an act of ultimate yielding to the unchangeable reality of the past. It's dropping the rope in the tug-of-war.
While you are holding that deep bow, the visualization provides the exact words you must speak aloud in your mind, the ultimate mantra of radical acceptance.
You say, I am glad you were my father. I take the good, I release the rest, and I reconcile with you.
I want to repeat that because it's so powerful. I take the good, I release the rest. It sounds deceptively simple on paper, but saying those specific words to the entity that represents all authority and structure in your life is a massive psychological earthquake.
It is the ultimate, definitive boundary setting. Let's dissect the phrasing.
I take the good.
I take the good acknowledges that life itself, your physical existence, and perhaps certain hidden strengths or necessary calluses, came directly through this specific conduit. You are claiming your inheritance, however meager it might seem.
And I release the rest.
I release the rest is the absolute final refusal to carry their unhealed generational trauma, their personal limitations, their anxieties, or their failures any further into your own timeline. You are leaving their baggage at their feet.
And I reconcile with you is the closing of the energetic loop.
It is the formal declaration of the end of the war. It's an acceptance of the curriculum you were enrolled in and a graduation from it.
After this profound reconciliation is spoken, the visualization guides you through one final, incredible, deeply symbolic step. You return briefly to the safety of the womb environment, but this time the instruction changes completely. The instruction is to give birth to oneself.
This signifies the total completion of the psychological journey. By visualizing giving birth to yourself, you are officially, energetically stepping into the role of your own primary parent.
You are declaring that the authority, the necessary structure, the validation, and the nurturing you require to thrive will no longer be hopelessly sought from the external, flawed figures of your past.
Nor will it be projected onto bosses or partners. It will now be generated entirely from within.
It's the ultimate act of taking 100% responsibility for your own future. You are stepping entirely out of the long, cold shadow of ancestral trauma and becoming a fully sovereign, self-contained individual.
So to bring this massive philosophical and psychological journey all the way back down to earth, I have to ask the practical question for our listener.
What does this all mean for our daily, mundane lives? If someone actually dedicates the time to do this intense inner work, what visibly changes when they open their eyes?
The source material is very clear and very confident on the real-world impact. When you successfully heal this inner foundational dynamic, your external reality absolutely must shift to match your new internal frequency.
Because you are no longer subconsciously projecting a lifetime of unresolved anger at authority.
You simply stop unconsciously attracting or provoking combative bosses, difficult mentors, or oppressive bureaucratic situations. You stop seeking out the fight.
Furthermore, your ambient day-to-day anxiety drops significantly because you're no longer viewing your own future through the distorted lens of a punishing, critical, or unreliable father figure. You finally trust the natural unfolding flow of time.
And perhaps most importantly for your life's work, your own creative masculine energy, your inherent ability to plan, to execute boldly, to build lasting structures in the world, it is finally unlocked.
It's unlocked because it's no longer tied up in a draining subconscious rebellion against the past. You suddenly have all your energy available to build your own life.
What an incredibly powerful place to land.
We have been on an absolute odyssey today. We have looked deeply at how rethinking the father energy isn't just a quaint psychological exercise or a niche esoteric theory.
It is essentially a master key to human development. It's a proven methodology to unlock your personal freedom, to unleash your latent creative potential, and to establish a truly peaceful, productive relationship with the world around you.
And it all starts by first making peace with the fundamental concepts of authority, structure, and time.
It is an undeniably dense, demanding, and often confronting framework. But the rewards it promises, a life genuinely free from the invisible, manipulative strings of the past, they're immense. It is the work of a lifetime.
Before we conclude, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering thought, a challenge based directly on the profound insights we have explored today.
I want you to bring to mind the authority figures you resent the absolute most in the world right now. It could be a micromanaging boss who drives you crazy, a deeply frustrating politician on the news, or even an overarching faceless societal structure that triggers your anger.
Hold them in your mind.
Now, ask yourself this with brutal honesty. Are you truly objectively upset with them in the present moment? Or are they simply acting as convenient, beautifully tailored holographic projections, allowing you to safely continue an unresolved, decades-old, screaming conversation with the very first authority figure you ever knew?
That is the ultimate question to unpack. Are you fighting your boss, or are you just fighting a ghost?
I strongly encourage you to sit with that thought this week. Take it on your commute, take it to the gym, really mull it over. Let it percolate through your interactions. See how it changes your reactions.
Thank you so much for taking this massive, incredible deep dive with us today. It's been a heavy one, but an undeniably necessary one. Take care of yourselves, do the inner work, and we will catch you on the next one.